let's now also move on to a very interesting discussion. And Kenya now today joins the rest of the world in marking the World Literacy Day. Well, this is the 50th anniversary of the day marked by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. Well, this year UNESCO marks the day to recognize the past 5 decades of national and international engagement, marking significant progress toward increased literacy rates around the world. United Nations Ban Ki-moon has called on the governments and their partners to join forces and build peaceful, just, inclusive and sustainable societies.
Niliwaeleza ya kwamba hata sheria TSC inatueleza ya kwamba mwalimu akikosa kukusaidia, akikosa kulinda haki yako, yeye anajua hata kazi yake iko katika hata
All right, so we want to have a discussion around that day that is being commemorated today or marked today, World Literacy Day. I don't know why that word is giving me some sort of problems. All right, so joining me in studio is Dr. Charity Limboro and also Dr. John Amuga, both who are educational experts. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
So, talk to us about World Literacy Day. I'm sure it's a new one for very many people who are watching us. What is it all about?
Yeah, this is celebrated as an International Literacy Day to do two things mainly: to bring to the attention of the public and the world on how important it is to be able to read and write.
Right.
It is taken many times for granted. So, and then
it is.
Yeah, and then the other thing is just calling people who can do anything to help someone read and write also come to that consciousness that really it is also our role, those of us who can read and write, to help others to do the same. Globally, we have about 700 million people who cannot read and write. And about 6.7 million Kenyans actually cannot read and write. And we are talking about adults, not children. So it is a big thing. You may take it for granted that you can listen to me in English, or you can see the undertitles that KTN is putting.
Right.
But that ability is very important, especially in today's world, and I think we'll be discussing it. This day was announced by the UN in 1965. So the first effective celebration was in 1966, and that's why today we can say it's the 50th anniversary and very important.
All right.
Yeah.
I like that you say that, reading and writing, it has been taken for granted. I mean, Dr. Charity, what are your thoughts on that? You constantly see so many people, even remember, what was his name? The really elderly...
Maruge.
Maruge, who, still, even at his age, he wanted to know how to read and write. But still you're saying that it's being taken for granted. How is that?
Yeah, thank you, Betty. From where I'm sitting, John is right, because people do not know how to read and write. Some of us who have that ability to read and write may not really realize what they go through. It's like they are totally in darkness. They have no ability to communicate, to comprehend, and really to develop themselves.
Right.
And when you say it has been taken for granted, it's from the fact that if today we are talking about it, there are over 700 million people, and two-thirds of those are women who cannot read and write, then it means that we are not really performing very well, even if progress has really been done.
Okay.
People who are illiterate are actually excluded from what is happening around them. And if we are saying that nobody should be left behind, then there should be deliberate attempt to really reach out to these millions of people who cannot read and write, given that they are normally the poor and from the pockets of the minority communities.
All right. It's interesting you say that, Dr. Charity, because, John, you mentioned that it's 6.7 million Kenyans who cannot read and write. This number, is it from people who live in rural Kenya, or is it generally widespread throughout the country? Because if it's rural Kenya, maybe the argument would be, if I'm able to communicate, with my shamba boy or, people who I interact with in the village, why do I need to know how to read and write?
Actually not. You'll be very surprised, Betty, that even in Nairobi where we are now, we have estimated over 800,000 people who cannot read and write. And these are people mainly who are doing manual jobs, working as a shamba boys, as you're saying.
Yes.
Others are working as house helps, cleaning clothes and all that. And I have written a story that I'll be sharing on Twitter about Naliaka. This lady who learned how to read and write in her adulthood in Nairobi here, in Kibera.
Okay.
And she lived for quite some part of her years because she had dropped off from standard 3.
Wow.
When she received a call, she wouldn't see who is calling even if that number was saved. Because when you don't know the difference between A and D and E and what all that means.
You can't make out.
You can't make out who is calling. So you have to pick the call, listen to the voice and be able to estimate who it is that is on the other side. If, like she narrated that at one point she had a boyfriend and he would send her texts.
But she
would have to go to a neighbor
to ask.
To ask. And because she wouldn't like the boyfriend to know that she cannot read because she thought he would go, and that is what happened at last. Then you lose privacy, you cannot get information.
Wow.
Look now at how much information we get every day on health, on various issues. Really, as Charity says, people who cannot read are like closed out.
All right. It's interesting that you bring a very different angle to it because, like you mentioned, I'm seeing how, you could say that we take it for granted, being able to read and write. But how really important is it? Like I mentioned, is it really worth the trouble if I'm able to communicate with the people around me? Charity, maybe you could take us through that.
Yeah, Betty, communication alone will not do the magic. We need to go beyond enabling people to gain the skill in which they can express themselves.
Right.
Because literacy actually is about empowerment. When you are literate, you are empowered. You make the right decision. You make the right decisions.
Right.
And you stand chances of gainful employment and for self-improvement.
Okay.
So ideally, when it's just left to communication, then still we are saying we have not reached the full potential of what literacy needs to empower persons.
Okay, so how then do we move forward? How do we reduce this number of, 6.7 million Kenyans who cannot read and write? What is your solution towards this number, bringing this number down, John?
We have been doing our WESO assessment over time. And what we have shown is that between 4 and 7% of the children who are finishing primary school, they actually drop back to illiteracy. And so if you give a standard 8 child something simple, an SMS to read or a small story, around nearly 10% of them will not be able to read at the standard 2 level, and which means the first thing to do is to ensure that those children who are in school today, at least let something be done so that 100% of them leave the school literate. Then that would mean that at least for this younger generation, we have covered that. Then comes the second question, how about those that miss the opportunity? And I think that the appeal now, because there are now many adult learning schools and classes, especially in towns and in urban areas. Today I was listening about a story on a school in Nanyuki, where people who are 20 years old, 30 years old can go enroll. If you only dropped off from standard 8, you never went to secondary school, you can go and enroll and even do KCSE within only 2 to 3 years. So also encouraging people who miss the opportunity to go. Don't be shy.
But where do they start from? Because, it's for an adult, it's very hard for them to really go back to primary school. So where do they start from?
there is a lot of stigma actually associated, and you know, the adult learning centers are called Gumbaru.
Yes.
I don't know what Gumbaru means or where that word came from, but it has a lot of stigma.
Okay.
But then we have these adult learning centers, because going to the primary school in standard 1 is really not right. What Maruge did was a powerful story, inspiring story,
Yes.
but it's not what is supposed to happen.
Okay.
Because he ended up as entertainment and distraction to the little children who are his classmates. So the best thing is to identify an adult learning center, because this adult learning center is adapted to a big person learning rather than a child. So even the way they teach, they start by introducing you to functional things, like how do you go to the bank and feel, how do you write an SMS, how do you do M-Pesa transactions, so that literacy has application, direct application to your life, rather than just learning how to read and write. And so these adult learning centers are there in many places, and this can be a good beginning for anyone who cannot read and write.
All right, Dr. Charity, you've worked with women and you've done women research. Yes. You know, how then, you mentioned that, you know, quite a big percentage of the people who are illiterate are actually women. What can you allude this to?
Thank you, Betty. From where I'm coming from, and given that our organization, that is Women Researchers, Women Education Researchers of Kenya, has done intensive research. What we noticed that the reasons why we have huge numbers of people who are illiterate, and specifically women and girls, one is because of poverty.
Okay.
The poverty levels really contribute a lot.
Okay.
And then, of course, there is the attitude where girls and boys have not been given opportunities to attend school. There have been preferences to educate girls against boys, and basically the competing interests.
Okay.
If, for example, a family has not met the basic needs, then given a choice of providing food for the household and sending children to school, then of course provision of food will take the center stage. Okay. But as work, we have actually taken some initiatives to promote literacy, particularly for the marginalized community. As I've said earlier on, you're going to realize that most of these people who are illiterate or semi-illiterate, they come from the poor background, poor households, hard-to-reach communities. Okay. And one of them is we have a project we call Opportunity Schools. It's among the MA communities, and we have specifically targeted children who are aged below 17 years, and we have demystified learning on how children learn by developing materials in my community. Okay. And I can attest that we have had, from the time we started implementing the project in 2012, we collected midline data, and 60% of the children now can be able to read in mother tongue. And I think that is a stepping stone to demystify the fact that children learn better if they are instructed in a language that they understand.
Okay, wow, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for your time. John Mugo, who is, of course, the country coordinator of Uwezo Kenya, and also Dr. Charity Limboro, who is the chairperson for Women Educational Researchers of Kenya. Thank you so much for your time. All right.